You as a human, while you're on the face of this earth, are not going to be able to get rid of expectations. And I would propose that they are both good and bad. And I would say they are. That's just the way life is. So expectations have that result that Jeff said, that it's, what do you say? Expectations are set up for disappointment. Oh, planned resentment. That's right. Expectations are planned resentments. Is that grammatically correct? It just sounded weird. Yeah, so that can be true, but they just are. Okay, maybe we can try to tackle that at some point. Let's see, where do I want to go from here? Any other? So what I'm hearing you say is, so this focus and understanding of the gospel. Again, you've almost hit the exact point that I'm going to hit in the sermon, so I'm going to try to not repeat myself later on. To me, what you're just saying is this idea of sin, and kind of as the foundation of understanding the gospel, is understanding how much he has done for us, what I deserve versus what I am getting as a Christian. So I deserve what? I deserve condemnation. I deserve everything bad that you can list. But instead, as we focus on the gospel, the focus is, because I've heard, and I'll continue to hear, why is there such an emphasis on sin? I've heard a lot of you say that. Why, especially early on? Why such an emphasis on sin? Are we supposed to just wallow around in our yucky bad stuff? Well, my initial reaction to that is, no, that's not necessarily what, I'm not wallowing around. To me, a gospel perspective of sin is, wow. And so it's not, I'm wallowing as if I'm depressed all the time because I'm focused on my sin. No, what sin is doing for me personally is it's providing the backdrop or the foundation with which there's this constant perspective of, look who I am, but yet look who Christ is, and look what he's done for me. Because it doesn't make any sense. What he's done is inhuman. It's not even a human concept. And if we're really believing that, or I should say, when we're really believing that, and I say that in this sense too, that's fleeting, isn't it? It's not necessarily a constant. At least it isn't for me yet, okay? I still get angry. I'm still mean. Don't say anything, Caleb. I'm still mean to my kids. I'm still mean to my wife. There's a lot of bad stuff that need to be changed at a heart level, but I have fleeting glimpses all day long of the fact that God has forgiven me of that. And yeah, I'm a terrible person. So I thought of a couple of stories in the Bible that can illustrate how I'm seeing change actually happen, which will address Mikkel's question to begin with. Is, I've had many conversations this week about how humans, Christian people, me as an individual, I see myself, I think, clearly. Jeff talked about this last week too. I think I see things clear through my eyes. I see everybody around me, and I make judgments, and I have opinions, and I have expectations, and I do that to myself too. And from this change subject, I see things in me that I think need to be changed, and I want changed. Okay? But how does that change take place? Oh, I guess where I was going with that is, I see myself through a deceived lens, glasses, all right? I see I'm not necessarily referring to this verse as a direct correlation, but I see myself and other people dimly, okay? I see it all goes through a tainted worldview. I say tainted, that sounds negative. It goes through a worldview. It's just the way life is. You've been shaped and formed the way that you've been shaped and formed. You have a belief system. You have a picture of God that may be different than me. And everything that you see runs through that lens. And you're deceived. You see things rightly and you see things wrongly. Good, he went to the bathroom. You can use, that's my kid, okay? You can use children. This is just excellent with children. if you've ever been around them, whether they're, whoever they are, okay? And the reason I bring it up is because probably on a weekly basis, especially Ronnie, because she does it better than me, is sitting there telling or trying to show one of the children how they are believing a lie in their opinion or judgment of one of the other kids. And how that happens a lot of times is an accident happens, and there's two people involved, affections and desires, that kind of thing. Two kingdoms are involved. Those of you that haven't heard me speak much, I use the term kingdoms. Christian and he represents a kingdom and I represent a kingdom. I'm not talking about God's kingdom. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Christian's kingdom and Don's kingdom. Each of us are our own kings and queens in our own world. And what is happening on a daily, hourly, minutely basis is those kingdoms are colliding. I've used before kind of that picture of, the big sumo blow up costumes that people get in and run at each other and collide. That's how life is going all the time. Is that I'm in my little kingdom bubble, and when we walk by each other, and it's not just like that. I'm not walking by Christians saying what a jerk, or but our kingdoms are colliding. They touch each other. And often what happens, especially with smaller children, is an accident happens, especially if somebody gets hurt, and I've seen it, especially when kids are little, is that immediately one child is looking at the other child and saying, you maliciously, with a terrible hard intent, meant this to happen, and you planned it, and and on they go with whatever they're saying. Whereas it could have been merely, they just bumped into each other. Total accident. But they create a whole story in their head that could last the rest of the day, as far as the anger, the frustration, the pouting, or even getting in trouble for what just happened, and now they're mad at mom the rest of the day. I mean, however it unravels in the life of the child. Are you guys following me? So that picture, as a silly little example, is that child created through his or her, view of the world that has everything to do with relational dynamics and everything else, has to do with kingdoms clashing, creates a story in their head, and they believe it with their whole heart, even though it's the farthest thing from the truth. You and I do the same thing. We might not be yelling at each other during the day or at church or at the house with your family, but you do the same thing in some way, shape, or form. And the interesting thing is, as the older we get, in our minds, we're able to justify it better or validate it as if it's okay. So, and what I'm talking about is whenever you have a condemning, angry, frustrated thought of another person, no matter how valid you think it is, and no matter how valid it may be, that's what's going on in your own head. You're believing truth and probably some lies in there as well, and it's contributing to your condemnation of other people. How did we get there, Tracy? Defining change. Okay, so defining change. This goes into what Mikhail just said is, hey, you may be focused on something that's behavioral change that may be appropriate that you want changed, but what is change? I guess that's, you can do the philosophical thing is, what is change? What is heart change? And I think rather than sitting here and pontificating on what change is or what it may be, even though that may be profitable as we move into August, I think the easiest thing is to look at various stories in Scripture. And the two stories that came to mind, actually three, but and I use this all the time with counseling. I mean, all the time, is the story of Joseph, Job, and David. Joseph may be a little harder, and I'm talking about in focusing on, let's observe how God instituted change in the lives of Joseph, Job, and David. All of them have a little bit of, little different flavor. Obviously, they're their own people. God worked in a different way, but I think it's valuable to see hey, what was the change? Did they even recognize that, hey, what ended up changing at the end, did they have, this is where it gets hard. I will say, did they have anything to do with it? Well, we'll have that conversation. But let's just look at Job, for instance. And it was probably 2 years ago now. I went through the whole book of Job, so I'll just kind of paraphrase it now. You guys know the story of Job. So Job, here's this guy. He looks like a great guy, great Christian guy. It says he's godly and righteous there at the beginning of the book of Job. But then what happens to him? We have an outside circumstance happens to him, right? So we don't know what Job's mindset is, so I'll try to refrain from inserting things that aren't in Scripture. But he was a regular man, regular person. And what we see of him, first of all, is God looking at him and saying, hey, here's my guy. He's a great guy. And we have the interaction between Satan and God. God allows Satan to do whatever it is that God allows Satan to do to Job. And we have an outside circumstance, outside situation happen to Job. And just like anything with life, of course, with Job, it was pretty extreme. It was super extreme. What did those outside circumstances impose? And just thinking about regular life. Yeah. So it was physical, it was mental, it was an agonizing gauntlet of suffering that Job went through. So if you can put yourself in that position now, and however you've gone through the same kinds of things, what happens in the human brain and heart when you're going through those things? What's imposed? What happens to you when you go through? Think about suffering that you've gone through that you've really struggled with. What is the struggle going on inside of here? We'll keep these in the kind of the heart, desires, affections. So control. Let's just list things that, what do you...
This isn't right. This isn't fair.
Worry. What's it? How about this? Fear. Guilt. Guilt, shame. What's that? Loss, yeah. Loss, grief, anger, abandoned. You can even say that in the not fair. Yeah, I was thinking about this in terms of the story of Joseph. And I was thinking, if there is one thing that at least I've seen as people struggle with different things, that a person just despises, it's abandonment by other people, and it totally goes with the not fair, that this isn't fair. I've been abandoned by the people that I thought I trusted. And just think of the struggle when you've been abandoned, or your perception of being abandoned has happened before. I mean, what are you going through? What are all the emotions that are going through in your head and your heart? I mean, all of these. Loss, grief, anger, no worth. So it ends up, and I would firmly, and I think it's listed in detail with Job in the story. You see Job wrestling with all of these things. And it's that crazy roller coaster. You guys have been there too, where at one minute you're crazy angry and you're looking at either the situation. You may be looking at the situation, you may be looking at God, you may be looking at other people, a mixture of all of it. And it's anger, it's bitterness, it's resentment, it's fear. And then you come down the hill, and then it could be guilt and shame, all of these things. And in a very, very real sense, especially with Job, I would propose that the internal suffering he went through was equal to or greater than the outward suffering that he went through. But again, thinking about change, again, this is just from a quick perspective of Job. So we see an outside circumstance, calamity happen, families taken away, terrible grief and loss, to then physical stuff happening to him. And all of his status is taken away. He's no longer the important man in the city. You've got all kinds of other things going on that are wrapped up in his person and his pride and everything else. So outside circumstance, you get the what do you call it? The pressure things. The vice grips. The vice grips start turning, which guess who's, and I want to be careful because it's easy for me to say, at least from my perspective now, guess who's doing that? It's really hard to understand that when it's really hard to say God is doing that, especially when it's bad stuff, okay? But at least God is aware of it, right? At least, especially in Job, you can't just say at least, God isn't just aware of it. God allowed it to happen, okay? He gave permission for this to happen to Job. So you got the vice grips going, outside circumstance, and who's initiating this pressure as of right now as we're looking at change? It's God. Remember, if you never know what I'm asking you, just say God or Jesus or the Bible. So God is allowing this pressure to take place. You may or may not even, you may think, Mikhail, that, hey, I need this change. This is bad stuff. But yet when the pressure starts happening, that comes out of nowhere. You guys have been through this a lot recently. Comes out of nowhere. It might last for a long time. And now way up more things are being revealed. I mean, if we're truly gospel focused and we're truly, as Christians, trying to observe what's going on in our own heart, or maybe we're not even trying to observe what's going on in our own heart, it's just being revealed. You end up you end up seeing yourself in a different way or from different angles, okay? That's exposure of what God is doing in your life, okay? So part of that pressure and what happened with Job, and it was a process, because at first, what was Job's reaction? Actually, let's kind of track Job's reaction at first. Remember what it was at first? At first, he said, hey, you know what? God gives and he takes away. Praise God. And that kind of validated the whole Job was a godly man. He's righteous. He's giving God the credit. And he's praising God in the midst of his grief. But that's where we talked about that in detail during that Sunday school. As those vice grips stayed, and as they got increasingly tighter, and as I said, as time and pressure goes on, what was revealed in Job's heart? What did we see? What did Job then, what was his reaction after praising God, after time and pressure increased? Oh, he went all kinds of places. He started questioning. He started saying, hey, God, you know what? And this is that believing lies. So Job, from his perspective, is saying, hey, this came out of nowhere. He didn't hear God say it, but if he could have, he said, God, even God said I was a righteous man. This came out of nowhere, and his initial reaction was, hey, this isn't fair. Because again, from that perspective, and I would argue from, because it's just a normal human perspective, but I think Job thought he was a pretty good guy. God had blessed him with everything. And normal human thinking, the more we're blessed, the more it usually is tied to, hey, I'm doing the right thing. Sorry, I think about this. I hear this from hunters all the time. Whenever I am successful in hunting, undoubtedly, many of my friends that don't go to this church literally will relate that to, what, you're blessed. You must be, and literally, they normally say, you must be doing the right thing, because they equate doing the right thing with being blessed by God. So Job, in his mind, believed that he was doing the right thing. He was a wise guy. He was helping people in the city. He was out. I mean, from that early perspective, he was a good guy. He was God's guy. But God had an idea of what he wanted to change in Job. That's where we'll get even to the talk about, well, what really is change? Is it valid to look at yourself and say, hey, there needs to be change in my heart? I think so. That's part of what God is doing in exposing me on a daily basis. He's letting me see my heart, and I'm saying, I don't want my heart that way. I don't want my behavior to be this way. So I think it's appropriate to look at your own life and say, I don't like this. That helps us continue to focus on the gospel, like you said. So it's not, I'll refrain from saying the do. So then what do we do with that? We'll try to get into that. So yes, in one sense, we look at our own lives, we see it dimly, but there's appropriate things that we see in it to say, yeah, I don't like that. I don't like the way that I relate to my wife or certain people or the way I react in certain circumstances. And I recognize that I'm still a rebel of God, and I don't like that. But yet, Job didn't know some of those things about his own heart. God did. That's the beautiful thing about the message of the gospel. And what God is doing in each life is God knows what he's doing in your heart, even when you're impatient and wish it would change, it would go faster. So God knew what he was doing with Job. He knew what changes he was going to institute. He knew at the deep, dark heart level these things that he was going to miraculously and gracefully and graciously change in Job's life. But we see this long process with Job, don't we? At first he responds, you could say appropriately, but then as time and pressure continued to last in Job's life, he said, hey, wait a minute, this isn't fair. I just love I can't get away from those conversations where he just says, hey, you know what? If the judge and I could just sit down and talk, it's all in poetry. So he uses, these neat Hebrew words in talking about God. And over again, he says, you know what? This is all a big mistake. Now think about that as a human, as a creature, in relation to the Creator. I mean, what's going on there? Is he truly confused? Well, sure, he's confused. Is he hurt and all those things that you could say is appropriate in a sense? And is the way that we are? But in another sense, the more you see Job talk, guess what he's doing? He's saying what to God? You're wrong. You don't know what you're doing. You got the wrong guy. That's right. Look at this. Now you really start to see Job's heart, which is really interesting because I never heard that growing up in the church. It's like 3/4 of the way through Job, Job just unleashes and you go, this guy is evil. Here's the beautiful thing about what we believe regarding the gospel, is he was righteous when God said he was righteous. And you know why he was righteous? Because God said so, and God, just like us with Christ, God had imputed his own righteousness on Job. So God could rightly say, Job is a righteous man. He's the most righteous in the whole earth. Why? Not because of what Job has done, not because of Job's heart, but because of Christ's heart. See, that's what, you get goosebumps because you start to see that perspective of the gospel that says, okay, now, let's look at Job. And I think it's like chapter, 32 or something like that. I'll look that up for you guys. To where you start to really see what he enjoyed. He enjoyed status. He enjoyed his riches. He enjoyed the reputation of other people. When that was all taken away, he was devastated. And now he starts lashing out in frustration and anger, and he is setting himself up as the judge above God. And now you can really see his evil heart in a sense. But now what I'm saying is what I truly believe about the gospel is, you know what is just amazing about that? Is God made him righteous because of what God did, not because of what Job did. And he wasn't even making him more righteous. He was being gracious in Job's life to expose to Job his own heart, to where once Job's heart was exposed and his perspective changed and Job was blown away, you see at the end of Job then, Job was blown away and he had a totally different perspective about God. And what you were just saying, Maria, was what happened there is God was exposing to Job's unbelief. I mean, I could say evil. I don't, there's words that are distracting. Evil probably isn't a helpful word, but it reminds me of what was said in the New Testament. That guy said, help my unbelief. So it's unbelief. Yeah, we say one thing. Job said, hey, God gives and he takes away. Hey, that sounds all great. It sounds great and all, but that's what I've said before. Every one of us has a threshold of pain that, when applied great enough, maybe I'll just apply that to myself. I believe I have a certain threshold, and when God allows that threshold to go beyond what I thought it was, I'm pretty sure I probably have the same reaction as Job. And what that is doing is not just, I'm not just going to wallow here and say, oh, look how evil I am, look how bad. No, it's God is exposing unbelief in my heart, and he's helping me to believe. See, so now maybe that helps with going to what is true change. See, we identify these change things as, hey, I have anger, I have, we put words to those, which again, I think is appropriate. I'm not saying that's not appropriate. But yet God knows what the real change needs to happen. And the real change is actually changing in belief. And what I would propose, and hopefully we can see this over the course of August, it's okay, it's not in the sermon, is you look at the fruits of the Spirit in Galatians. So we could list all the fruits of the Spirit. What are they? You guys better start saying them before I forget them all. Love, joy, peace. What else? Long suffering. Ooh. I was hoping to forget that one. So guess what happens? Guess what happens at the end of Job's life? And we don't even see specific things that God targeted. Like, you know what Job needs? He needs more of this, or he needs more of this, or he definitely needs this one. We don't see those that God said, okay, you know what, we're going to set out and do these things. What happens is we see the way God works. He works in the life of a person. He works in the deep recesses of the heart of a person, and he changes their belief. And guess what the residual is? Fruit. See, this didn't click until I think this morning or last night when I was laying in bed. Because I've had this idea a long time that whenever I've seen behavioral change, or and I'll say some of these, it hasn't been because I've seen somebody work on them super hard. It's always, don't never say always and never, but I'm going to say it's always been, or usually been, that God takes somebody through this life experience, he exposes unbelief, he helps them to believe more or differently, he gives a totally different perspective of Christ and the gospel, and the next thing you know, you see Job. What is his answer at the end of Job? He says, I place my hands over my mouth, and he says, somebody remind me, look it up real quick. Job 41. I thought I had known about you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes have seen you, and I repent in dust and ashes. And that's not just a wallow. I would propose it's not just a wallowing. Guess what? Guess what was the residual effect or change from a human perspective as a result of deep change from a God perspective? Guess what happened? All of a sudden, he had humility. All of a sudden, he had patience. He had a gentleness. He had things that he didn't have before that he didn't even work on. And fruit. So that concept of fruit, because I've been struggling with that it's like I've seen changes in people's lives as a result of fruit. You don't work at creating fruit. A tree just creates fruit. Ultimately, it's God that is creating that fruit as a result of that tree. So if we say to an apple tree, I need you to produce some plums, start working hard at producing plums. It's impossible. You guys know that. Yeah, Mikkel. I will propose that I think there is something we can do. I think that there is a way that we can, and I think it's what the church is built to do. This goes into my concept of Christian and biblical counseling. on the concept of bearing one another's burdens that Paul says in Galatians, and what James says about confessing your sins one to another. I think what God is doing in the church, or what He would like us to do, is relate to each other in a way in which we are going to each other and basically soliciting, hey, I need help to see myself for who I really am. And we can't go there because we got to start. But I think there's things that we can do within the church that is being honest and transparent with each other, to where I'm going to go out on a limb to actually say, hey, you know what, Christian, I want real feedback from you as to how you see me as a dad, as a husband, as just a person in general. And as I expose myself to another Christian brother or sister in that way, and we have this. I just said I wouldn't go there, but I think we can create some things like that in relationship with each other, that then God allows that to happen without it being cancer at the end of my life. That is that kind of a thing. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And the crazy thing, and thinking about the different scenarios, what you may be in, and especially with what happened to Job. Yeah, he didn't ask for that. He wasn't expecting it. It was on God's time. It was on His plan. And normally when we go through suffering like that, we just want to get it over with, which is a normal human reaction. But to even recognize, you know what, God is allowing this in my life, no matter how hard it hurts, as an opportunity, and He's transforming me and other people as a result of it. That's a back to the gospel focus, to say, as hard as it is to say, it's a blessing. And I know, you guys may be looking at me in the face someday saying, Don, this is a blessing. And I'm going to look at you and say, no, it's not, because it hurts too much. But that's what we keep reminding ourselves of in the gospel perspective.